Welcome to our CMS Pioneer webinar, which is around Mission in the Neighbourhood, Part 2. And I'm really delighted to welcome John Wheatley and to Anna Ruddick, who are going to share some of their wisdom with us this afternoon. I'm James Butler, and I work at the Church Mission Society on the Pioneer team, teaching on the MA programme. And it's really great to welcome you all. I guess I wanted to say a little bit about CMS, in case anyone has not come across CMS and our work around pioneering. We've been engaging in work with pioneers, particularly in the UK context for the last 15 years or so, with offering various levels of training from certificates all the way accredited training at undergrad and postgrad level, and you can even study a doctorate with us. So there's lots of ways to study, and our desire is to catalyse and develop a movement of pioneers and to resource and support people in their pioneering and mission work. So it's great to have you with us, and we hope that this webinar can be some of that resourcing. And we'd love to connect with you, and we'll offer some ways that you can continue to connect with us at the end of this time together. So today we're looking at Mission in the Neighbourhood Part 2. Mission in the Neighbourhood Part 1, we reflected on some themes around how might you get started thinking about mission in the neighbourhood. Where might you look, and how might you make some of those connections? And here we're looking at how that might build, how you might develop this in the long term. What happens when you do start connecting with your neighbourhood? And as I say, it's great to have John Wheatley and Anna Ruddick to join us in doing that. I will let John and Anna to introduce themselves when they present, but it's great to have them both here and both teach on the CMS with CMS on some of our courses, as well as doing lots of other interesting things, which I am sure they will be happy to tell you about. So I think that's all I need to say, other than to remind you, as you've already been told as you joined, that the meeting is being recorded. And so if you'd rather not be on screen, then do keep your camera off. But if you're happy to have your camera on, we'd be delighted, because it would be really good to see you and know who we're talking to. So I'm going to hand over to John first, who's going to talk about journey and presence with young people. So John, over to you.
Great. Hi, it's lovely to meet you all, and I'm pleased to be here sharing. I teach on the youth and children's work pathway at undergraduate level, and I'm a children's and youth worker in Weston-super-Mare. So that's kind of what I'm talking about today, is kind of some of the thinking and theory around some stuff and some of our work, some stories of our work, and how this relates to kind of journeying and presence in the neighbourhood. So I'm just going to share my screen. So here we go. Journey and presence in the neighbourhood. And I thought I would pick up on where we started last time, which was talking about how you might connect with a group of young people in the neighbourhood, to think about how you go around journeying and having a sense of presence in the neighbourhood in a more wider sense. So this is my community here in Weston-super-Mare. We've lived here since 2010, which is about 15 years. And we moved into a flat above the shops and just started engaging with young people in the neighbourhood. And we now live just across the park. And so I wanted to start by presenting the neighbourhood, and I found a picture. This was I found this on a news article about how notorious our estate was, listing all the problems. And I thought, actually, part of the thing about journeying with the neighbourhood is about your solidarity with the neighbourhood and your solidarity with the people that you journey with. And I wondered if I'd put up a picture like this instead, whether you'd get a different picture of what my neighbourhood is like. This is more or less the same view out from my house, just looking at a different direction. But you see the sun is shining and people are busy. And that feels like a real change from an image like this. And I think part of what we do when we journey with a neighbourhood is to move from being this is the thing that we are doing to this neighborhood, to this is something that we are doing together, that I am part of this neighborhood. And so I wanted to kind of start there in terms of thinking about like what does it mean to journey with young people? So I pulled together just a few little pieces about child development. Like, so here's a little grid. Down the left-hand side are things that we know all young people go through during adolescence. Their brain requires development, and so requires more sleep. We know about hormonal changes. We know about their desire for independence. I'll let you read the rest. But we so often stereotype young people based on these ideas, these ways in which young people are developing. And so we see their need for more sleep as being lazy or being unmotivated. We see their desire for independence as being rebellious or disrespectful. We see their awareness of body image as being vain or being attention seeking. Like their shifting relationships towards their peers and away from their family is experienced by us as disconnectedness. And I think actually how we talk about the people that we're journeying with matters. And I think this matters particularly with young people, that actually like aligning yourself with young people and in support of young people and about solidarity. So in my little talk today, I want to just kind of talk about some of the ways in which we can journey with a community in a way that is maybe more in solidarity and about our presence than it is about us doing something that is our little empire running a little project in a space and rather kind of joining in with the bigger picture. And I thought I'd start here with this idea from Matthew 13 that the kingdom of heaven is like yeast. Um, I think when we started and we moved on to the estate, it very much felt like we were maybe planting something or growing something. And it was this sense that we were going to build a project or a church that people were going to join. And I think over time, we have wrestled with our place within the wider community so this is a lovely map of people have kind of laid out all the places they love in the community. And I think it shifted our question to think about actually how can we contribute and be a part of this community rather than how can we bring something that people join, like that changing of journey. And so one of the things that I have ended up doing, I mean, I'm not sure it was even strategic really, but have hosted a network of youth and community workers that work across our neighborhood. So they're in the schools, they're in health, they're in community work, they're in housing, bringing those people together and creating a space where people want to work together, working out what things align, what ideas, where is there synergy in our kind of values and what we want to achieve in this community, and how can we contribute? And bringing professionals together with local members to say, well, actually, what can we grow? And in doing so, I think I've noticed that we, the church or the Christians in the area, have to let go of the power dynamic to shape the narrative. Actually, it's about doing things with people that are good in the community. And I think what's interesting about the idea of yeast in bread, one is that it's really slow, but also that the yeast is kind of used up when the bread is made. And so it's about the bread, it's not about the yeast. And I think that's a good challenge to us that, so much of mission work can be framed around us as the missioner rather than the community that we're in. So yeah, that's where I thought I'd start there. And then I thought I'd just kind of share some stories and some thinking that have kind of pulled out. I think when we first started, people gave us this, I think has been good advice. The first thing is about that working for less than 5 years might do more damage than good. That if you're not building deep relationships, particularly with young people, that you show up and then disappear from their lives, what does that do? And I think that challenged us to take a really long view of even just starting out, that actually there's an intention here to journey over time was really important. And then someone else said to us, people overestimate what they can do in year one and underestimate what they can do in 5 years. And I think that's been a really helpful reminder to go slow and take a long view. That actually, we don't have to do it all now. You don't have to have a shiny project on day one. Actually, maybe you never need a shiny project, but actually journeying with people over time is really important. And so I just put up some photos, some of our projects and some of just kind of stock photos that kind of connect. But I wanted to kind of encourage people to do simple things really well in terms of journeying with young people. And so, like, here are just some stories of things that like we're doing and of trying, and that there's nothing flashy about them. So this is a picnic in the summer. It's going to happen in a couple of weeks' time. All the children will be off school, young people will be off school, and they won't get free school meals during the school holidays. And so we just provide sandwiches and activities in the park. And that kind of journeying with people over time. And we've run this project for 15 years now. And going back to that idea of being the yeast in the bread, pulling people together, this is not a project that one group can run for 6 weeks sustained. Actually, like that's tough. And so the way that we've run it is to pull people in from all of those different organizations, and everyone cares about hungry children. Everybody cares about there being something happening in the school holidays. And actually working together means that everyone can do a little piece and it can run all the way through. And families can bring stuff. And so everybody can play their part rather than it being about one group feeding someone else. I think so. We're also going on coach trips, and that's just like holidays and days out. Like it's really just a lovely thing to do. Is just to kind of advertise that we're going on a trip and invite people to come. And this summer, we will take people down to Torquay and Weymouth. And actually just being on a coach with people is a really good way to get to know people and chat to them. And I put a picture of bacon here because every Tuesday morning, me and a group of other local professionals, we just go down to the housing foyer and cook breakfast for young adults um, that are living there. They've got 36 flats, and like nothing happens. So we go and open up their shared kitchen and serve breakfast. And that's been just a really lovely way of journeying with people without really an outcome, just kind of joining in with what's already happening and joining the community. And I think like part of this mission work needs to be about presence and about journey, not just about doing things or holding things. And so my final piece of advice is just to dare to join in. Here's a lovely photo of me doing the bouncy castle. And I put this photo up because I really don't like doing the bouncy castle, but I feel like sometimes you just need to kind of muck in, roll up your sleeves and get on with the thing that needs doing in order to be part of a bigger picture. And yeah, I would encourage you to approach mission work in a community with young people as joining in rather than as necessarily leading. So yeah, there are my reflections on being in the neighborhood. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, John. Really, really helpful to see that. Um, I really liked that insight around the yeast isn't the main part, that it's about the bread and not focusing on the yeast. And just really helpful in that kind of moving us away from the idea of the shiny project. Um, is that did you have these insights starting on, or how have these kind of developed for you during your time working? Is this something where you've kind of made mistakes and learned, or have you had some helpful kind of starting points that have helped guide you down this way?
Yeah, I think it's definitely been a journey for us. I mean, we will they train youth workers to do a needs assessment. That's the first thing you do when you start a project. And so we showed up believing this was a poor community that needed some kind of outside fixing, and we wrote a quite hefty needs assessment and then kind of framed ourselves as the solution. And I look back at that with shame, that actually that model is really disempowering to the community. And I think over time, realizing, especially as we've had children and kind of been at the school gates and journeyed in this community over a long time, realizing that you just can't hold everything and there's lots of good things already happening. And actually, sometimes the role is about hosting and about pulling people together. One of the first things that happened when we were there, after about a year maybe, is the local council deleted all the youth services, and that meant that there were lots of these little youth projects springing up, but no unified strategy. And one of the things that that fell to me to do, or maybe I picked up the mantle to do, was to kind of just host people and get people doing things together. And so things like a shared picnic or running a coach trip where you take different leaders from different places, it got people talking, got collaboration going, and that felt like I think that kind of started to seed that idea of, or like, is there a different mode for this kind of work that isn't about us running the project? So yeah.
Oh, that's really helpful, and that idea of partnership being key. So I'm sure there may be some other questions for John, and do hold on to those. If you want to kind of, if you're worried you might forget it, you could even put it in the chat so that we kind of know that that's coming up. But do kind of keep an idea on those and keep a note of those. But thank you, John, for sharing that and some really inspiring, kind of helpful ways in, some nuggets there. Um, Anna, it's great to have you here too. And I know that in many ways, what you've been involved with over many years, um, through your work with the Eden Project and work beyond that, has been very much along the lines of the kind of stuff that John has been doing and the lessons that have been doing. So I'd love to hear about your experience and what you have to share with us. So Anna, over to you.
Thank you, James, and thank you, John. It's really helpful and interesting, and yeah, there'll be lots of complementarity, I think, between what we share, which will be really interesting to hear your perspectives on. It's really good to be with you all. Thank you for having me. Thank you for coming. And yes, please do feel free to stick questions in the chat as we go. And as James said, we'll have more time for Q&A for either myself or for John towards the end, and just responding to one another. So yeah, my name's Anna Ruddick, and I've been sort of in and around the kind of urban mission-y churches doing stuff in their communities kind of business for quite a long time now, as it turns out, and that's been quite a journey for me. So part of what I do is teaching, part of what I do is helping mission practitioners of all sorts of kinds and types to come together and reflect together on what they're seeing and experiencing. And I want to just share with you today some thoughts that I've been mulling over for the last few years about something that I've kind of called missional self awareness. So I will share my screen with you, and hopefully that will become clear. Okay, can everyone see my screen in presentation mode? Yes, excellent. Thank you for the thumbs ups. Fabulous. So I guess what I've seen in accompanying people engaged in mission in their neighbourhoods, and that has primarily been my kind of role, a kind of accompanier, is the importance of a kind of growing self-awareness. And John's already kind of alluded to some of that in his own experience. It'll be interesting to hear what he makes of what I'm offering. And I'm going to suggest that this kind of developing self-awareness is actually a spiritual and a missional task, as well as a kind of personal and relational one. Because mission in neighbourhoods raises questions, particularly if you take the approach that John's suggesting and actually stick at it for a bit. It will inevitably raise questions for you, and what you do with those questions matters for your own personal health and well-being, for your spiritual life, for your mission and your ministry, and for your neighbours. And there are various options for what you do when you find you have questions in life, isn't there? As we all know, and we've probably all done all of them over time in different ways. So one option is just to double down, to kind of find the questions a bit unnerving, to actually not be that comfortable with the idea of the unknown, and kind of retreat into familiar or inherited narratives. And in the context of neighbourhood mission, doing this usually means doubling down on what we think mission is, on our ideas of who God is and how God works in the world, on our expectations of us, ourselves, and of others around us. And this might be, these kind of frameworks, these previous inherited ideas might be derived from our faith or from other sources. And usually it's a bit of a tricky mix of the two. Our kind of cultural background, our heritage, our faith tradition get mixed up together. And it means that it's very difficult for us to be sure that when we think we're just being faithful to the gospel, that we actually are. We all run the risk, including me, in offering these thoughts, that we're confusing some of the things that seem like givens in our context with Christianity. So some other options if you've got questions and you don't want to double down. So if you're not well supported in your mission, if you don't have people to talk to, then questions might really send you into a bit of a tailspin. The ground that seemed firm under your feet might suddenly feel like shifting sand, and your faith might really be fundamentally rocked, for some people never to recover. And some do sometimes walk away from their faith, finding it untenable in the face of the complexities they've discovered in mission. Others might embark on a personal journey of theological deconstruction that makes their mission feel more and more difficult or awkward, but also never seems to reach a kind of resolution or a reconstructive mode. A third option might be if you are able and fortunate enough to have supportive, curious people around you who are not easily shocked, with whom you can say the hard things. Actually, maybe there is a different path, and that's the path that I want to suggest is a journey into missional self-awareness. The experiences of a lot of team members, mission team members, that I've journeyed alongside, who have got involved in neighbourhood mission in all different kinds of communities, have highlighted the fact that mission is essentially an encounter with someone who's different to you. Even if that difference is simply their unique humanity plus their faith story, it's still difference. And the way that our ideas of mission interact often with our current society, with its kind of charity mentality, means that, as John really well explained, we tend to see people in categories, those who have and those who need. And that kind of first step of youth work being a needs analysis thing is an example of that. And in churches, it's really easy to swallow this whole. Our mission then often includes charitable giving or service alongside communicating our faith verbally. So often then in mission, we encounter people who are different from us, not only in faith conviction, but also culturally, socioeconomically, ethnically, and in a range of other ways. But the problem with such conceptions of charity is that they are one way, from one party to another. It often fails to respect the personhood of people who are the recipients of charity. It confirms the them and us of the haves and the have-nots, rather than breaking it down. So if we say mission, however else you define it, it is about encounters with difference. I would suggest it's also about meaning making fundamentally. For better or worse, Christians are trying, through their encounters in the world, to expand, to develop or change the thinking of others about themselves, about life, about God, about Christianity. But my questions are around, do we engage in this mission, encounters with people who are different from ourselves, from a place of equality and mutuality, that solidarity that John was talking about? Or is our conscious or unconscious starting point one of superiority? And that superiority might cloak itself in a theology of the Lordship of Jesus, but when it is expressed in your particular life or in mine, in my particular or your particular words and actions, when it has our skin on, it's not separate from the complexity of privilege and marginality that is uniquely yours or uniquely mine. And of course, our theologies of the Lordship of Jesus are also shaped by particular people in particular times and places with their own particular skin on. And for me, it's a lack of self-awareness in this, which has led to many forms of mission being corrupted by colonialism, by imperialism, becoming about persuading other people that our way of seeing the world and living in it is right, and requiring that people remake their own meaning systems in our image. Now, hopefully we're thinking about mission in a more nuanced way now, as exploring our own understandings of the world in conversation with others who see the world differently. And what I've found in my research, my ongoing work with mission practitioners, and my own experience is that a truly missional posture is that of a learner. Recognizing that we don't see or know fully and being willing to receive insight about ourselves and about God from those who are different from us. And this kind of mission both requires and develops in us a personal, a political, and a missional self-awareness. So I would define missional self-awareness as a growth in awareness of our own background, influences, and postures, and the impact that we have on those around us in the cause of reconciliation across difference. Exploring and being attentive to the assumptions that we bring to mission and to marginalised communities, and when I say marginalised, I mean left out. And doing that alongside my own personal and professional experiences, I've begun to view marginalisation in the round and in layers. There are many factors and groups of people who are marginalised in our society in different ways. It's always important to ask the question, who is left out here? I'm coming to the conclusion that we all experience overlapping and interweaving privilege and marginality in different ways and in different contexts in our lives. You may be familiar with the language of intersectionality, which describes the way that multiple factors of marginality compound one another. Understanding this is a vital part of that self-awareness, but equally important for me is understanding the complex dynamics of both privilege and marginality, particularly in our own lives. And maybe that's partly because my own story of mixedness of privilege and marginality has led me to need to come to peace with that. We need a balanced awareness of our privilege. For example, in my own experience, my gender means that I experience a degree of marginalisation in some settings, but my whiteness, my education, my shift from a kind of working class to middle classness means that I have a lot of cultural capital to counter the difficulties that being female might cause me in some settings. Paulo Freire describes the way that the oppressed can also come to contain the oppressor in some way. We can become both victim and oppressor. I speak myself, and I suspect many white people, in that I think until we can look ourselves square in the face and acknowledge that we can contain both victim and oppressor, questions of marginality and prejudice will always lead to tension and withdrawal within us. Within church or Christian settings in the Western, developed, late or postmodern world, we often think about becoming secure in our identity in very individualist terms, don't we? Knowing who we are in Christ. And it connects for us with the kind of psychotherapeutic disciplines in our wider culture. It becomes about self-realization within a particular theology. But the personal is political in the sense that it is social. We are not autonomous individuals completely separate from one another. We are alongside one another. What you decide about yourself impacts those around you. Part of our personhood is that we, simply by existing, make a dent in the world. We matter. So wrestling with our own experiences of both privilege and marginalisation, however weighted in one direction or the other they might be, I think is helpful in a couple of different ways. Firstly, it does justice to the complexity of reality. The world is more complicated than either or. Social change comes when we get deeper than opposites and find our common ground. Secondly, it forms a basis for solidarity and shared humanity. Working for a more just society involves overcoming us and them, not just drawing the lines in different places. We respect the personhood of others when we can be at peace with our own mix of privilege and marginality, and when we can recognise our fundamental worth as an existing human person made in God's image. This then frees us and calls us to leave or make space for the personhood of others. And in doing so, we then receive the gift of the revelation of God's image in them. So finally, what might we do to develop missional self-awareness? Think about who you spend time with. Do you spend a lot of time with people who are quite different from you in some way, who have a different view of the world? If not, maybe try and challenge that a little bit. Get curious. Have conversations with people about different perspectives on their lives and on the life that you share together, whether that's, an encounter with a school or use of services in your community. Address your own unconscious bias. Intentionally diversify the images around you, the way that you engage with the world. Be aware that we all carry unconscious bias and learn and lean into how you can address that. And give time to self-reflection. Do your own work of this. Make your inherited frameworks, whatever they might be, visible to yourself so that you can explore their influence on your mission. I would argue that this is right at the heart of our missional task. Partly because mission is about God's justice coming to all, and our lack of self-awareness often means that we simply embody patterns of injustice and prejudice. For our mission practice to be truly expressive of God's kingdom, we need to act differently, to fly in the face of the beliefs and systems which deny God's love for people. And finally, because God's mission is to you and to me, not just to the people in our communities. Raising our self-awareness brings about a deeper encounter with God for you and for me, and more fully enables us to be an active part of God's kingdom in our world. I'll stop there.
Brilliant. Thank you, Anna. Some really helpful reflections. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions. I particularly liked how you drew us to actually begin to explore those questions that feel difficult. I know how tempting it is to try and ignore those or pretend those questions don't exist. And I guess I've I think my experience is the same as yours, that actually in beginning to tentatively open those up, uh, it actually becomes more exciting. They're not actually a threat, they're actually opportunities. And I loved how you drew us into this kind of language of solidarity as well in all that you said too. Um, Given where we got to in time, I reckon it would be good to drop into some breakout rooms now. We thought that it would be nice to give you an opportunity just to buzz with one another for just a few minutes to see what the questions are that are arising and the points of connection for you. So in a second, you will receive an invitation to a breakout room. If, however, you'd prefer not to go into a breakout room, do feel free just to ignore the invitation, and you can stay in the main room for 2 or 3 minutes, and and we'll come back together again for a Q&A with John and Anna and reflect together a bit more on some of these themes in the last 20 minutes or so. So we've got about 15 minutes to think about the questions. John or Anna, I wondered if either of you wanted to kick us off just by noticing a point of connection between your two presentations, and anything that kind of struck you that was of interest in the kind of either the point of connection or a slightly different perspective.
I really, really connected with that idea that, it's the self-awareness is so important that you feel like you start on these journeys thinking you're going to do something for someone else, and actually realize that actually most of the work is in your heart, of working out who are you and what you're doing, and how am I going to be faithful in this space? And therefore that actually is just not actually about changing other people. It's often about changing yourself. I really relate to that.
Thanks, John. Anna, is there anything you want to say in response to that before I open up to questions?
Oh, let's hear questions.
Brilliant. Good. Has anyone got a question that they would like to ask to, John and Anna, or one or the other? Do just raise your hand or jump in. I'm aware there's a few in the chat, so I might call on people from the chat if people are happy with that. Jennifer, I noticed that you had a question in the chat. Do you want to say that question out loud, or I can just read it if you prefer? Sorry, you're on mute, Jennifer.
That won't help, will it? Okay. So this is John. I really enjoyed that idea of contribution rather than putting things on for people. That really, and contribution in the neighbourhood, I mean. Over the years, I've worked for another church as well for 17 years, where it is deeply involved in shiny projects that actually aren't so shiny anymore. They've been running for years and years, but there's been little crossover into church. We're known as a loving, kind place that'll do anything for anybody, but there's very little crossover. So how do you share the gospel as you love the neighbourhood? Do you hope that the love of the neighbourhood will bring people to see there's something in you that they want, or is there another way? I'm sorry, I know this sounds rather old-fashioned, but it is the perennial question.
I think it's a good question. I'm not convinced there is a one-size-fits-all neat answer to it. I think so. Thinking about youth work, I think one of the things that youth work does differently to the way that churches operate. If you think about like your open access church youth club, you make space for everybody in that while holding a space for your values and story and message and tradition. Whereas if you think about, like, if you compare that to like a Sunday morning classic church, there's a sense in which that narrative, the dominant narrative, is the one that everyone is participating in, and you can sit through it, but it's still happening. Whereas in a youth club space, there's a lot more space for maybe dissent and alternative narratives. And I think, thinking about community work, I think I'm interested in what does it mean for me to be a Christian in this space in a way that is genuinely good news for this community, and where can the bit that I bring to the puzzle play with and alongside everything. And so one example, and I think you find different ways, but like how can we run a lunch club with a picnic with lots of people bring stuff to? What does it mean for the church to bring something that is spiritual or tells a story? And so in my last presentation, I had a picture of a dome we'd put up, which was we called it a cathedral, and we told the story of the parable of the sower. But we talked about it in terms of how does good news land and how is it received and how does it make a change? But from our perspective, it was not about saying there's one story or one truth, but actually this is how we contribute this to the wider picture. I think the other thing I'd say is that it does depend on your, I guess, metaphor or mode for thinking about mission, salvation, what is the work of God doing and how do we engage with it? And if you have a view that it's about reaching a decision, then that influences everything you do. but I think I would at least err towards the idea that loving the neighborhood is sharing the gospel. It's not a means to an end, it is the end. Like that is what we are called to do. And so, yeah, I'm not sure that, I guess it's not a neat answer, but I think like wrestling with some of those questions, I think is part of the work. It's part of that self-awareness that Anna was talking about. Actually, your theology hits a road, and that's like you kind of have to work it out in practice. Sorry, I've talked a lot there. Sorry, James.
And there's another question that's along a similar line from Faye about how do you assess when it's good to share Jesus, and is that part of your presence right from the beginning, or do you wait to share more later? Which I think is going along similar lines. But I wondered if you wanted to if you had anything to add to that, or wanted to kind of reflect further on those kind of questions.
Yeah, and in our small group, that they were the questions that were buzzing for people: is how does faith sharing fit into this picture? And I mean, John's done a brilliant kind of unpicking of that. I think what I would add, and I'm thinking particularly, Jennifer, the picture you painted of your church that's had these community projects running as their own thing, and then the image I got in my head was a very separate church community, and those things sort of happening in parallel, and not much crossover. And I would agree with John that for me that is a valid form of mission in and of itself. But I hear you, there is countless churches across the country who say, why don't these people stop coming on a Sunday? And then the people who run the community work get upset, and then and there's angst. And so some questions around that. So once in that situation, you could say, okay, so that's a valid part of mission. So we just leave that be, actually. That's doing a bit of mission. Brilliant, fantastic. How does faith sharing happen in our church community? That's maybe a slightly different question. And one reason why I would suggest that perspective is because what may be happening in community projects is that you've got a power imbalance set up between the church as provider and the community as recipient. And for me, I think faith sharing should happen in a mutual space to be healthy. And most of our church community projects are not very mutual spaces. So that said, so how then does faith sharing happen? So first of all, the question about how early or late do you kind of introduce that? So you come as you are. You're a human with a whole load of different stuff in the mix. You may have children or not. You may be married or not. You may be, of a different class or from a different country, or, all sorts of different stuff. And you have a faith as well. So does everyone else. Everyone else has a faith in something. I think we kind of end up with this weird kind of performance box that we feel like we have to perform our mission. And so then you kind of say, oh, well, do I withhold this bit for later? No, be yourself, be a human. It's okay. You're a Christian human. That's fine. You're allowed to be that. And actually, don't underestimate the significance of your simple living and doing the things that you're doing as part of your mission. It's funny, isn't it? Ministers say that to Christians with normal jobs on a kind of weekly basis, don't they? But actually, I'm now saying it to people who might be engaged in community neighbourhood mission, and find it a bit weird because you've got a role as well. So, but don't underestimate. Yes, you may not be opening with a kind of gospel presentation. That would be weird, wouldn't it? Like, but maybe you're starting, as John described, like getting alongside people, asking, where do I fit in helping good to happen here, in helping, God's love to come into this community in a different way or in a fresh way, or joining in with some of the really lovely things that are happening that remind me a bit of God's kingdom. How do I fit into that? So just be yourself and share who you are, and respect the professional boundaries that are around you, but build friendships too, and allow your faith to become a part of those conversations naturally and inquisitively. So you ask about other people's values that their lives are informed by, hear their stories, I think for me, faith sharing has to be in a mutual space and it has to be non-coercive. And that by that I mean when we share our faith, we're not demanding a response from another person. So that other person may well journey in their understanding of who God is and their desire to follow something that looks like Christianity or the way of Jesus. But it's not our job to push or coerce. That is God's job. Our job is to share openly who we are and to do that in a way that is mutual and non-coercive.
Thanks, Anna. There's a question from Sarah of the kind of the struggles of actually building those partnerships, and how do you do that when actually, despite there being some sense that people might want to engage, actually you don't get the responses that you expect. Sarah, I see you unmuting. Did you want to add to that?
No, no, I didn't actually. Well, what I was thinking of, I'm thinking of something very specific, but the kind of, yes, great, that'd be fantastic. Email me. And so you've had a verbal yes, but it doesn't happen, and it's that kind of, should I just give up? But you know, the last few minutes actually have been really helpful, I think. But yes, anything on that would be really helpful.
John or Anna, a quick reflection on that?
I think my learning is partnership work is really hard. It's much, much easier just to do it on your own. And I think that's why feels like a challenge. Our I think one way that we've gone about it is to create opportunities to invite people to be part of it. So knowing that you want, for example, the police to come to your event is like going out and saying, look, we really want them there, and kind of building opportunities to do things together, and trying to again, I think what Anna was saying, like the mutualness, trying to shift the power to it being they're coming to my thing, to this being something that we're doing together, and therefore we've planned it together, we're both excited about it, we're going to do it together. I mean, it just takes a lot of time and a lot of communication, and I don't think there are any clear like tips and tricks that solve it. I think it comes down to relationships, and that's hard graft.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Time has raced away, and we're almost at 1 o'clock. John and Anna, thank you so much for the wisdom that you shared with us and the insights that you've brought into this. It feels very rich, and I certainly feel that there would be at least another hour's conversation that we could easily have about all the things that you've shared and the questions that have been raised. But yeah, can we say thank you to John and Anna for their sharing to us? So thank you. Just before you all race off to go and have your lunch or whatever you're doing at 1 o'clock, can I just draw your attention to a few other things that you might be interested in? We've got a couple of webinars coming up. One is looking at faith and faithfulness between generations based on some research, and that's part of the Acts 11 Centre at CMS. And I think Jeremy's going to put some links into the chat. So if you want to find out more about that and look at hear about some of the research that's been going on there, do book into that. We also have a webinar exploring themes around the Bible Society's report on the quiet revival, which I think is very relevant to some of the stuff that Anna and John were saying about sharing faith. And so I think that will be a really great conversation with Dr. Rob Barwood-Simmons, who did the research in conversation with some pioneers, thinking about what that means for pioneering in what's being seen. I mentioned that this is being run by the Pioneer training team at CMS, and if you're interested in the training that we offer or anything that you'd like to find out a bit more about what we're doing,